So picture this. It's the aftermath of the SARS epidemic, right?
Okay, yeah.
And this author, Zhu Feng, he's just going about his day when he overhears something completely wild. There's this woman, maybe in her 30s, and she is openly complaining about the survival rate of the outbreak.
Wait, complaining that it wasn't lethal enough.
Yes, she actually looks around and says out loud that it would have been better if the virus had wiped out a few billion people.
Oh, wow.
Right. So naturally, he's shocked. He stops and asks her, like, why in the world would you hope for billions to die? And her response is just chilling. She looks at him and goes, there are too many people. How can we survive?
I mean, that is the kind of statement that just short-circuits your standard moral compass.
Totally.
Like, you expect grief after a tragedy, not a complaint about inefficiency.
Exactly. And welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today, we've got a very specific and honestly a pretty intense mission for you. We are unpacking this deeply provocative essay called Space and Hatred by that author, Zhu Feng.
Yeah, we're really looking at the architecture of a very dark idea today. This text dives into radical theories about human population, the raw biological nature of competition, and, what supposedly happens when living beings simply run out of room.
Right. But before we get too deep into it, I think we need to set some ground rules.
Definitely. Right at the top, we have to establish the parameters here. The material we're looking at today contains some really extreme viewpoints.
Yeah, it does.
I mean, it deals with unsettling themes about humanity's right to survive, forced population control, and even divine intervention. So, to be absolutely clear with you, the listener, we are not endorsing any of these viewpoints.
Not at all.
We are not taking sides politically or philosophically. We are strictly here as your guides today. We just want to help you understand the mechanics of the arguments presented in this original source, regardless of how disturbing they might be.
Just putting the ideas on the examination table, and the way this author builds his thesis starts right with that woman's shocking statement about SARS. He doesn't write her off as a psychopath.
Right.
He doesn't frame her statement as pure evil. He actually frames it as a symptom. He calls her reaction a textbook example of space-caused hatred.
And that phrase, that's the operational engine of the entire essay. The author's premise is that hatred isn't necessarily a moral failing or like a learned ideology. He grounds it in strict biological determinism.
Meaning it's built into our DNA.
Exactly. If space causes hatred, it has to be observable in the natural world, far below the level of complex human thought.
Which brings us to the chickens.
Yes, the chicken.
He takes us from this macro-level pandemic wish down to a highly controlled micro-level environment. He asks us to look at a standard chicken coop designed with a maximum capacity of 10 chickens.
Okay.
If you put 5 or 6 chickens in that coop, they establish a pecking order, sure, but they generally live in perfect harmony. They eat, they roost, they go about their business.
Sounds peaceful.
But the moment you introduce the 11th chicken into that exact same rigidly defined space, violent conflicts erupt.
And the mechanism there is crucial. Because the chickens didn't suddenly adopt a violent ideology.
Oh, of course not.
The physical environment literally forced the violence. When the physical space drops below a certain threshold per organism, movement inherently becomes friction. Every step a chicken takes bumps into another, threatening its access to resources.
It's just a permanent state of biological stress.
Exactly. And he compounds this with mice. He notes that if a mouse nest becomes overcrowded, you don't just see the effects. You can literally hear the sound of the mice fighting from outside the nest.
That's horrifying.
It is. It's an audible friction. The population hits a critical density, and the result is immediate, relentless physical combat.
In evolutionary terms, it's basically an alarm bell, and some species have actually developed structural fail-safes for this.
Like the bees, right?
Yes. The author brings up the beehive as the ultimate biological response to critical mass. When a hive gets too crowded, it triggers this hormonal and behavioral shift. A new queen bee emerges and initiates what he calls a splitting activity.
So they just leave.
Exactly. The hive literally divides itself and swarms to a new location. It's a biological imperative. Crowded things must divide to survive.
And then he turns the lens right back on us. He points out that human families follow the exact same structural law.
Oh, this part was so interesting.
Right. When a single household grows too large, like too many generations or siblings under one roof, the natural result isn't just a cozy sitcom environment. The natural result is friction.
Right, the complaints start.
Exactly. Quarrels over space, privacy, and resources become chronic, and inevitably that friction leads to the division of the family. People move out. The household splits to keep the peace.
It's basically the human version of the beehive swarming.
It really is.
But, reading this, I have to admit, I found myself instinctively pushing back, like, we are not chickens and we are not mice.
Sure, we have art, philosophy, law.
Exactly, we have complex emotional regulation. Isn't this just a highly cynical reduction of human life? But to test this out, I tried to map his theory onto a modern, everyday experience.
Okay, what did you come up with?
Think about being packed into a crowded elevator, or like sitting deadlocked in bumper-to-bumper traffic. You can be having a great day, but the moment the doors close and someone is standing 2 inches from your nose...
Oh, I know that feeling.
Right, or you're boxed in by metal on the highway, there is this sudden, almost irrational rage that flares up in your chest. You don't know the people around you, they haven't wronged you, but you feel this intense hostility just because they are there.
That's a perfect analogy. And if we look at the evolutionary biology beneath your elevator example, that reaction isn't an emotional failing. It's a survival mechanism.
Wait, really? How so?
In that elevator, your subconscious is rapidly calculating resources. Your brain is measuring oxygen depletion, physical exit routes, threat proximity. That irrational rage is just your amygdala screaming that your survival perimeter has been breached.
Wow.
The author's core philosophy is that this space-caused hatred completely bypasses human morality. You cannot judge the people in that elevator, or the chickens in the coop, by standard metrics of good or evil.
So it's purely mechanical.
Exactly. A cramped space inevitably leads to conflict. And the text takes this to an absolute logical extreme. He argues that if this spatial hatred is not resolved by dividing the space, it will ultimately and inevitably escalate to murder.
Jeez.
Yeah. If the tension is not released, the organism will destroy the competition to reclaim the space.
Which is a terrifying escalation. But it brings us directly to the massive, looming question of the essay. The biological rule of the natural world is that crowded things must divide.
Right.
The bees split, the families move out. But what happens to humanity when there is no more space left to divide into? Like, what happens when the whole elevator is full?
This is where the essay scales up from the micro to the global macro level. The author looks at the Earth as a finite grid. He notes the global population, which he cites as 6.5 billion people at the time of writing. And while he concedes, we haven't quite reached the point of total global mutual killing.
We're not there yet, thankfully.
Right. But he argues that this cramped space is already generating a profound, indescribable oppression across the planet.
An oppression that impacts both massive governments and everyday citizens. I mean, he specifically points to highly populous countries like China to illustrate the timeline of this friction.
Yeah, the density there changes the game.
Because of the sheer density, the brutal competition for survival space doesn't start in the job market. It begins in early childhood. From the moment you can walk, you are fighting for your square footage, your resources, your spot in line, your desk in a classroom.
And that childhood reality contextualizes the woman from the SARS anecdote perfectly.
It really does.
Her horrific wish wasn't born of malice. It was born of profound, lifelong exhaustion. She was just tired of the relentless biological competition.
Yes, and that exhaustion feeds right into what the author identifies as a terrifying, vicious cycle. And, it starts with a completely innocent premise.
Okay.
It starts with the basic human desire to live a better life. Everyone wants security, comfort, and resources for their family.
But in a geographically limited space, that innocent desire becomes destructive.
Yeah.
Because to live better, you have to extract more. That desire inevitably leads to plundering resources, occupying more land, and invading the space of other organisms just to secure your own comfort. And the direct byproduct of that massive collective scramble for resources is severe pollution.
We pollute the water, the land, the air, just trying to carve out a comfortable existence.
Exactly.
This was a massive aha moment for me, and I think it will reframe things for you listening too. Because when we talk about environmental pollution today, we almost entirely frame it as a technological failure or like a regulatory failure.
Need better carbon filters.
Right, or the emissions laws aren't strict enough. But Shuefeng is framing pollution as a direct psychological symptom of cramped space and survival anxiety.
Wow.
We aren't polluting because our machines are bad. We are polluting because we are desperately fighting a biological turf war in a crowded room.
From an ecological standpoint, that flips our standard narrative entirely. Industry isn't just a byproduct of progress. In this framework, it is the weapon we use to hoard space. And the profound tragedy of this vicious cycle is its feedback loop. The pollution generated by this competition actually shrinks the livable space even further. The air becomes unbreathable, the land becomes unfarmable, and the water becomes toxic.
So we're just boxing ourselves in even more.
Right? As the usable space shrinks, the competition for the remaining clean space becomes exponentially fiercer and more brutal.
So we are accelerating the crisis. The elevator is getting smaller while the number of people inside stays the same. What is the natural consequence of not solving this?
The author lays out a grim, cascading collapse. He argues that if the space continues to shrink, plagues, wars, famine, disasters, earthquakes, and floods will inevitably arrive.
Just a complete unraveling.
Yes, and they will come alongside a total breakdown of the social contract.
Hmm?
Theft, robbery, kidnapping, and murder.
But the critical philosophical distinction he makes is that he categorizes all of these horrific outcomes, the wars, the famines, the plagues, simply as nature.
Not a political failing.
Exactly. It is the earth acting exactly like the overcrowded chicken coop. The violence and the diseases are just the biological system violently attempting to rebalance the space.
It's the beehive desperately trying to split, but with nowhere to fly, which is an incredibly heavy, fatalistic concept to sit with.
It really is.
But the essay doesn't stop at the natural ecology of the situation. The natural consequences of overpopulation are brutal enough, but the author then introduces a second, much more supernatural risk to humanity.
Yeah, this is a major pivot in the text. We move from observable biology and global pollution cycles into a highly specific, very personal allegory about external intervention.
Right, he tells a story about his dog, a dog named Larry.
Good old Larry.
So it begins as a story of abundance. Larry mates with a neighbor's dog and gives birth to 11 puppies.
So suddenly the author has 12 dogs living in his yard.
Right. And initially, it is a joyful experience. The puppies are vibrant, full of life, running around. But as they grow from puppies into fully grown dogs, the sheer physical reality of the space sets in.
And the joy rapidly deteriorates into absolute chaos.
Total chaos.
He details the mechanics of this chaos vividly. First, it's the basic resources. The 12 dogs start fiercely fighting over food. Then it becomes an infrastructure problem. Their droppings are everywhere, completely covering the ground to the point where the author can't even walk down his own pathways.
The space is physically choked.
And then the biological stress translates into psychological breakdown among the dogs. All 12 of them are fiercely competing for one finite resource, the owner's attention and affection.
They just swarm him.
Yes! They surround him so tightly he can't move his legs. And because dogs are pack animals prone to jealousy, this desperation to win his favor turns violent. They start viciously biting each other right at his feet.
And the friction even spills out of the yard, doesn't it?
It does. The author notes that whenever the front gate opens, this massive swarm of hyper-competitive, deeply anxious dogs rushes out. They terrify innocent passersby. They make children scream.
So the internal crisis of the yard is now a public threat.
The situation has become completely untenable. So the author takes a step back and looks at the math. He assesses the physical dimensions of his yard and concludes that its absolute maximum healthy carrying capacity is exactly 3 dogs.
Okay, so once he knows the capacity, he has to take action. He gives away 6 of the dogs. But the math still doesn't work. 6 dogs are still too many for a 3-dog yard.
The fundamental friction remains.
Right. So he has to give away a few more until exactly 3 dogs remain. Once the population matches the capacity, the yard instantly becomes peaceful again. The fighting stops. The paths are clear. He refers to this process as a forced purification.
I want us to really sit with the empathy or, lack thereof in this analogy because it is chilling. I want you, listening right now, to imagine being one of those dogs in the yard.
It's a scary thought.
From your perspective on the ground, you are just living your life. You're competing for food, you're trying to get a pat on the head, you're reacting to your environment, and suddenly your creator, the owner of the yard, starts arbitrarily disappearing your family and your friends.
You'd have no conceptual understanding of why.
Exactly. To you, it seems unimaginably cruel, random, and terrifying. But from the creator's view, looking down at the whole yard from above, it isn't malicious at all. It's just cold, necessary math. It is a forced necessity to save the integrity of the space.
That gap in perspective is the entire point of the allegory, and the author answers the implied question very directly. He is explicitly comparing humanity to those blindly breeding dogs, and he compares the yard owner to what he calls divine beings.
The metaphor is an outright warning.
A huge warning.
Unpack the warning for us. What is he really saying here?
The core expectation is that humans, unlike dogs, possess rational foresight. We have the unique cognitive ability to look at our yard, the Earth, and calculate its carrying capacity. We can foresee crises.
We can do the math.
Right. But the warning states that if we choose to act blindly, we function purely on biological drive, considering only our individual needs, hoarding resources for our own little corner of the yard while failing to plan for the whole subsistence, we will force the hand of the yard owner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If humanity acts like the dogs, these divine beings will have no choice but to step in and implement a forced purification on us.
A divine culling, not out of anger, but out of ecological necessity. Because we proved incapable of managing our own spatial math.
Precisely. The Earth is the yard, we are exceeding the capacity, and the Creator's patience is not infinite.
So we have this massive apocalyptic threat established on two fronts. We have the natural earthly disaster of the overcrowded chicken coop and the supernatural threat of divine purification from the dog yard.
Two very heavy swords hanging over us.
Exactly. With these twin swords hanging over humanity, how does the author suggest we actually avoid this fate? We finally arrive at the climax of the essay, the ultimatum.
The author does propose a solution. He states that to resolve the crisis of overpopulation, to avoid the spatial hatred and the impending catastrophe, humanity must completely reorganize itself.
Okay.
We must live and produce according to a framework he calls the theories of Lifechanyuan.
Okay, so he introduces a very specific ideological framework. To understand what this means within the context of everything we've just discussed, this theory essentially demands the total opposite of our current biological trajectory.
Golden version. Yeah.
If space causes hatred, and the vicious cycle is fueled by the individual desire for a better life, then this Lifechanyuan framework requires a massive collective shift.
It implies a utopian reorganization.
Exactly, where humanity transcends its selfish biological scrambling. We would have to operate with a macro-level awareness of the Earth's limits, abandoning individual competition and resource hoarding for the sake of communal global harmony. We'd basically have to step out of the biological rat race entirely.
Which is an incredibly tall order. It requires overriding millions of years of evolutionary programming.
And here's where the text gave me absolute whiplash. The author sets up this grand, sweeping utopian solution, and then in the very next sentence, instantly and jarringly, he completely pulls the rug out from under the reader.
It's crazy.
He explicitly states that expecting all of humanity to adopt these theories is, and I quote, wishful thinking, a fantasy, even a delusion.
It is a stunning rhetorical pivot. I mean, in almost all radical philosophy or utopian literature, the author genuinely believes their system can and will save the world if people just listen.
Right, so why do that? Why spend an entire essay building up this massive apocalyptic framework, outline the precise ideological shift required to save the species, and then in the exact same breath dismiss your own solution as a complete delusion? Is he just throwing his hands up? Is it a cop-out?
It's not a cop-out. It's an admission of profound philosophical despair.
Despair.
Yeah. The author looks at the sheer unstoppable momentum of human biology, the chickens, the mice, the vicious cycle of global crowding, and he realizes that asking 6.5 billion people to suddenly abandon their biological imperatives is mathematically impossible. He concedes defeat on the macro scale.
He literally gives up on the world.
He does.
Yeah.
And because he gives up on universal salvation, his philosophy shifts from a utopian global movement into a lifeboat scenario. The goal shrinks.
To what?
It becomes about self-preservation and selective enlightenment. His final proposed action in the text is this: take a long-term view and focus only on leading those who understand the truth out of the narrow space of competition.
So he only wants to save the people who can already see the limits of the yard. And as for the rest of the billions of people still fighting in the elevator,
His exact concluding instruction is leave it to fate.
leave it to fate. That is an incredibly cold, heavy place to land.
It really is.
Let's take a breath and recap the sheer scope of the journey we just went on, because we covered a tremendous amount of ground today. We started with that visceral, dark wish overheard during the SARS epidemic, a raw expression of spatial exhaustion.
Right, the woman who wished for less people.
Yes. And we drilled down into the biological mechanics, the unavoidable friction of the overcrowded chickens, the audible combat of the mice, the forced division of the bees.
We then scaled those mechanics up to human society, mapping out the global vicious cycle where our natural desire for comfort drives us to plunder resources, creating pollution that shrinks our livable space and breeds even more brutal competition.
And finally, we confronted the chilling allegory of Larry the dog, the threat of a forced divine purification based on cold spatial math, and the author's ultimate fatalistic pivot to abandon the masses and only guide a select few out of the fray.
As we wrap up this analysis, it is really worth reiterating that the conclusions in this text are extreme and the cosmic worldview is highly fatalistic.
Without a doubt.
But examining these mechanics provides a deeply fascinating mirror to our own modern reality. Even if you completely reject the theology or the strict biological determinism presented here, you cannot deny the underlying symptoms.
You really can't.
The anxiety about resource scarcity, the dread of environmental collapse, and the visceral physical stress of losing our personal space, these are very real, palpable forces driving society today.
Absolutely. The rage in the overcrowded elevator is real, regardless of whether you blame biology, policy, or a divine yard owner, which leaves me with a final lingering thought I want to pass on to you, the listener.
Okay, let's hear it.
The author's ultimate advice to his followers is to lead them out of the narrow space of competition. But here is the inescapable physical reality. We all share the exact same planet. There is no other yard to walk into.
Right.
So if we cannot physically leave the grid, could stepping out of this narrow space be a purely internal mental shift? If physical crowding inevitably triggers hatred, can we consciously train our minds to override that biological alarm bell?
That's a fascinating reframe.
I want you to mull this over today. In a world that is only getting more crowded, how do you mentally construct space in your own life so you don't become just another chicken fighting in the coop?
A vital question for the reality we actually live in.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It was a dense, provocative journey, and we appreciate you exploring it with us. We'll be back next time to unpack another stack of sources. Keep questioning the architecture around you.